It's a hot take.
I think it is. Hey everyone, welcome to another Lords of War video. We are going into hot take mode here for a little bit.
Ooh, I love hot take time.
Yeah, and we're going to discuss the idea of whether or not a new miniature game can even come out anymore from a smaller company.
Wow.
Yeah, is it even possible,
is it possible?
In today's climate?
Is 2023, 2024, is this... Wow.
Is it possible? And I guess what the game that kind of got my mind rolling a little bit on that, we can kind of get into it a little bit and discuss some of the previous ones in the last year or two. But this new game from Corvus Belli called Warcrow is supposed to come out sometime in 2024. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what it was, but yesterday I was kind of just like diving in. They've been showing off some stuff recently. And yeah, I'm like super impressed. Like the miniature quality looks amazing. I think their plan is to do plastic miniatures.
Mm-hmm. Or their plastic, whatever they're...
Or thermoplast or whatever,
plastic is, yeah.
And it looks, I think you could argue based on what you tend to see on a hobby store shelf that there's a lack of sort of like fantasy options for miniature games. You get a lot of sci-fi because it's all the Star Wars. You get like superheroes. You have BattleTech. There's a lot of... Mm-hmm. But yeah, no one else really does like a sci-fi game outside GW that I think, other than of course D&D is like.
You mean fantasy? Yeah.
Yeah, like a fantasy sort of like game. So yeah, you have if you haven't checked out Warcrow, definitely go check it out online. There's all your typical fantasy tropes. You've got humans, elves, dwarves. There's orcs. There's like a crazy looking chaosy sort of army that looks pretty sweet. So yeah,
and I think the game is it's a dungeon crawly game. So it's kind of a board game but with really nice models, I guess. So you kind of like, I guess, like you grow the dungeon as you go through it, and it looks pretty detailed. Looks really neat actually. And Corvus Belli has a good pedigree of making D&D type games or game D20 system games,
right?
Which I assume it's using. I actually didn't look that closely, but anyway. But like Chris said, we've kind of had this discussion like more and more, I guess, the last few years. Basically, as Games Workshop has continuously grown, or expanded its sphere of influence by probably because of how much it invests now into their ancillary games that they just didn't before. So whether it's Horus Heresy or games like Warcry and Underworld, Necromunda,
Legions Imperialis
now, like the net is so wide, and then you combo that with the extremely powerful thing called nostalgia. So a lot of these are like remakes or new spins on old props. So like obviously Legion Imperialis is exciting because they used to make a game called Epic 40K, which was tiny 40K. They did that with the Titans and the Planes, with Titanicus and Aeronautica, and then like games like Warcry, which aren't quite... It's more of a spiritual successor to things like Mordheim and whatever. Like they just keep making all the little games. There's
a like this, we call it an unfair advantage, and you can make the comparisons outside of the industry into like products like Magic the Gathering, and you could go into like Nintendo with their like IPs like Zelda and Mario and stuff like that. That there's just this breadth of history there. That they can draw upon. That other companies, like when you're creating a new game, you can't just tap into that. Like you're talking about hundreds, maybe thousands of novels that they've written that build a universe, right? So it's this crazy advantage they have.
And then you add in other little forces which are like you can't discount, is like their penetration into like video games. So games like Darktide, Vermintide, Total War, right? And now you got Cavill making a TV show on Amazon. Like it's so dominant, and the thing is, like, a lot of it is good. So it's not not even like, oh, we're just vomiting out garbage and like.
No, you think Space Marine 2 is gonna suck?
Yeah, like
no way. No way.
So,
it's gonna be great. Yeah.
So all of this to say is that it's we as like gamers, hobbyists, etc. Like, there's only so much dollars we have to give for this hobby or whatever. And they're kind of sucking them all up. Whether like, you can put your foot down and be like, no, I hate, but it's like it's so hard when it's like so prevalent. So it's just good. It's not even bad stuff. Like,
there's two things I'd say. Yeah. So like one would be, think of like this plucky new game that has all these fantastic miniatures. They have let's say the rules are good, everything perfect product. Let's call it a perfect product.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it is.
It's usually close, though.
Why should the real problem you're dealing with though is why should someone care?
Yeah.
Right? Why do I care about this orc miniature? There's no context, right? So they have to build. That is an impossible task.
It's so hard.
Building the context for you to care about that universe, the world, the miniatures, the story. It's almost a seemingly impossible task.
It's very tough.
And the reality of the other side of it, where you have the retailer side of it, what Jay was talking about with all these products, Games Workshop, it's almost like a siege on the walls of your hobby store. So they are literally, the way that Games Workshop is fighting these smaller companies and winning and succeeding is they're battling over the shelf space.
They're taking it over.
They're saying, hey, hobby store, you carry our products and they sell well for you.
Yes.
We have this new game coming out that will also sell well for you, and you know that it will.
Yeah.
So find space for it.
And
it's your job to find space for it. And the byproduct of that decision, let's be honest, rent is expensive. People don't have endless space on the wall. Is games get bumped.
And now is another unique climate because we're now in the post-pandemic era or whatever. Is stores are looking for those easy wins. They're not going to take the risks. They're just going to be stocking the things that sell well, sell out. They're just not going to take flyers on this and that, and that's, and also supply lines and things even with all the issues that we constantly we can bring up about Games Workshop about we're not getting enough of X or something is you can say they botched this or that, but generally speaking, people are getting stuff from them. And relatively on time. They've had considering everything, they have very few hiccups. Whereas any other game company that usually doesn't go direct, it goes through a distributor or whatever, things are late all the time or barely at all.
This is the other part of monopolization where you get into where you have these companies that are mostly vertically integrated and control a lot of their own factors of their production line. And then you have smaller companies that don't necessarily do it. Now, if we are talking about Warcrow, Corvus Belli's a pretty smart company. They do in-house production. So this small little plucky company has been able to mostly keep up with their releases and stuff like that, which even from a bigger company like Asmodee, which doesn't do any of their own in-house production, they are absolutely annihilated by delays and constant problems with there's last year in 8 months there was no Marvel releases.
It's wild.
And whatever everybody says, at the end of the day, people care more about a game it's just the way the world is. People care if a game is alive or dead, they measure alive by is stuff coming out for it. Even if they're not buying it, they care a lot about that.
Followed by who's playing it.
That's followed closely by who's playing this. So a death knell can be for a game. We've seen it with other Asmodee product lines like X-Wing and stuff like that. Or what's the ship game called? Armada.
Armada, yeah.
When stuff stops coming out, people are just stop playing it. It is bizarre. But we are in a very commodified, hyper sort of consumerist society, and that's unfortunately how a lot of people are. They measure it against Games Workshop. Right? Yes, it's always going to be measured against Games Workshop. Yeah. So, and then there's other factors I think that you can also bring in is, I don't know. This is maybe my own take or whatever, but these smaller companies, I would say, and actually I would put Corvus Belli in I wouldn't even put them in the small category. I'd put them in kind of the small medium or whatever. They have a real kind of facility. They kind of have their own factory. They have an office. I think they have 30 or 40 people working there, or maybe there's 100. I don't know. It's not as small. It's small is there's people at Adepticon that are literally 2 people in a garage. Yeah, of course. Yeah,
and then these guys I
don't want to offend those people, but I almost don't count them. And that's not that's more just when you're a retail store. The kind of starting point for me is are your products available for us to buy them? You know what I mean?
But anyway, they come in all shapes and sizes.
For sure.
But they're I would put them in a little bit a rung higher than small or whatever. But they we're in this era also of where the Kickstarter is still a massive thing. And what we've basically seen is these smaller companies, because they're we can't brute force compete with GW. We can't just even Privateer Press had to yield or whatever. They can't just make new releases, make lots of these models, get them into stores. It just doesn't work that way anymore. So they have to to insulate their expenses. They do these big Kickstarters, and then they get the money up front.
Yep.
They get to and then release it all a year later and all that. So it kind of is a, it's like if you're a contractor and you can take a big job on and it'll just pay you for the next year kind of thing. And sometimes that's great because you're just you don't have to, keep every month isn't like a live or die thing or whatever. The consequence of that though is to make the Kickstarters exciting and worthwhile is you have to release a lot of stuff, which to sweeten the deal, make it feel really good for the consumer, and then they release it all out. Stores have already learned their lesson, and they don't even want to touch these anymore because these products kind of arrive in store, and the people that wanted it already Kickstarted, so that no one's coming in to buy.
I feel like that's probably a whole video to itself.
Yeah,
the whole Kickstarter phenomenon.
It is.
You're absolutely right. It has probably at least 50% of the problem that you're describing. You can blame Games Workshop all you want for small miniature companies not being on the shelf, but Kickstarter is the other thing, right?
Yeah.
And you cannot blame these small companies for taking that money. It's hard to blame them.
It's the Occam's razor or whatever. You're like,
it's the simplest. It's the easiest thing to do.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, if you want to see your product end up on a retailer's shelf, it's the worst way to do it.
It is the worst. Yeah. And even then, even ones that try to do the we've seen the hybrid thing where we're like, okay, we'll have a retailer Kickstarter, but even that has its problems because often we get the product way at the end, so last it almost doesn't matter, and then still the problem is that's great. You can kind of for a retailer, you're like, okay, I can get the stuff and get it maybe sometimes you get lucky and you get it around the same time everyone's getting it. But then ultimately, the thing that matters is what's the next release, because the new release is it's like having this I don't know, it's like trying to grow a plant or something, and you have this little thing growing, and it's great, but but really the next phase is the one that matters when it can grow big enough to stand on its own, and for that you need the new releases. And the problem is the new releases often are the next Kickstarter, so actually you have to wait a whole another cycle. 18 months or something. And it's tricky. I think the only game I've seen have an interesting history with that and sort of make it in a few places. We had it for a little.
Game of Thrones?
Yeah, it was Game of Thrones. You know it exactly. Yeah. So we've seen it kind of come back in a few stores.
I think there was enough
because enough stuff came out.
Enough stuff came out after. I think you're right. I'm absolutely right.
And I bet you the Old World coming helped it probably because people were looking for. Because you read the article and you want to turn around and play that thing or dig through your stuff, and it's kind of the best. It's probably the best rank and flank that's not Warhammer that's been made in the last 20 years. Or whatever. Because the models look great. I played a few games. It has a very clean thing, but it has wheeling and flanking and it has all that kind of stuff in it. And
it gets past the most difficult thing, which is actually getting your models on the table. Because they all come built already. So you can actually
just pop them out of a package.
There's not too many models in a unit too, which is
they're
smart.
12s and 4s and whatever. So anyway, so there's all these other barriers like Kickstarter. I don't know. I still, on one hand, I'm this is fine. It lets certain products exist that maybe wouldn't be able to. So that's again great if you're fans of those IPs and those things. So there's.
I think we've seen it be pretty successful, more or less, in the board game world. But I would also say, and this may be another video idea, Stonemaier, who's a huge board game producer, has made a pretty wonderful revelation kind of article, and it's probably a couple years old at this point now, about why they were leaving Kickstarter.
Oh, yeah.
So it's the sort of idea that eventually your company gets big enough that you actually need to fund your own projects. Right. And if you want to have a more successful, bigger, broadly, have places like us actually carry those games and sell them constantly and win space on our shelf, that you need to actually not do the Kickstarter thing forever, right?
No,
And they did that. They things like Wingspan, they weren't Kickstarter. They just came out in the retail brick and mortar first. So they've done incredibly well. We stock them all the time.
There's been I'm trying to remember if there's another example. I feel like there is, where they kind of started in that format and then they made it out. It's you have to crawl out of that and then kind of make it and then you can. But anyway, that's That's a really good point. Yeah, and ultimately, yeah, if you're going to stay on the shelf, you can't just be back-to-back kickstarting. It just doesn't work or whatever. So people kind of get exhausted with it. Like Kickstarter does another thing, in my opinion, that I think just doesn't work well for miniatures and hobby stuff. Is getting all the stuff at once is like, it's funny. It's like a kind of, you think it'd be great. You're like, oh, I got such a great deal on like hundreds of minis, and it's like nothing like destroys people's like ability to like. It's like getting the pile of shame all at once. It's just there's no way you're gonna pick up one box and
it's like a mountain gets delivered to your house.
It's a mountain
and
gets
like,
delivered. Yeah, go climb it.
Figure out how to climb this like immediately.
And then even if you have friends that are interested, you're like, yeah, hold on, let me get through this all, and then maybe we can play in 3 years or whatever. It's like it's kind of like, and I think this has been scienced out in various consumer industries and products that like giving everything all at once is not good. Yeah. Companies purposely don't, they're going to release, I don't know, a new PlayStation and a few games, and that's it. And it's not because they don't have the other ones ready. It's because they know that like people have only so much money this month. You want to have something exciting for next month, and like keep the excitement going, and people can't consume it all like that quickly. So
exactly.
So So right now, I'm still like, but yeah. So then I guess the last portion maybe has to do with like. So we have some existing games that have some like pedigrees in life, and like how are they faring or whatever? Like, are they just hanging around? Or are they just like? I feel like they're just slowly getting edged out. Like your point about.
Yeah, I think unfortunately all the non-Games Workshop games are battling for survival right now. Whether that's true on the company's spreadsheet or not, we won't see the ramification. Like things take a long time to resolve, right?
Yeah.
So. Whether it's just like a store's placing less orders, that's the start of it, right? You're just not restocking as much. You're looking at your sales reports. You're like, oh, okay, I'm selling about half as much this year of this product than I was the year last year.
It's slow. It's like a really slow thing. Everything looks pretty normal, and then one day it's just dead.
And then sometimes like the company can kind of like counteract that for a little while, and this is where you really start to like throw gasoline on the fire in the worst way. Is they say, okay, we're not selling as much to retailers right now. We need to do more direct sales. So what do they do to incentivize that? Well, they start doing deals.
They
start to you see where it's going. Yeah. Now they're selling a lot more direct than they are to retailers. They're compounding the problem. And then before you know it, War Machine's off of the shelves of our store.
Or whatever, yeah. It never made it to our store, to be honest. Yeah.
Well,
a lot of viewers maybe don't know that. we're turning 9 this year, and we just didn't. We saw that happening even years ago. That was probably our best prognostication ever, or whatever. But not that there's anything wrong with that game. It's just the company. We just didn't. Anyway.
Unfortunately, like the situation I just described.
Yeah. No, that's true. And then really it's like if a distributor's dropped it, it's like, oh, this is... Because they're the ones that are like, all of your games, other than a very select few, are going to a distributor. A distributor's just another... It's like a middleman. It's a it's a company with a giant warehouse that's floating the money, basically saying, this is a hot new product, we're going to carry a bunch of it, and then they're trying to, sell it, get it into their clients, into the retail store that are their clients. And anyway, that's how most of our little games are going. And if one of them decides, we're going to pass on that, then that's basically it. Because like when people walk into a store and they're like, what's in the store? What games are hot? It's like really a lot of it is the decision is made by what the store can get easily.
Yep.
And if they all of a sudden can't, so I would say that one example of that was Malifaux in our store. Great game. We had it for I don't know, for at least half our history, like 3, 4, 5 years. Like Chris said, it was probably a perfect game from like great minis. Great rule set.
Good stories and background.
Good releases.
Yeah, really cool.
And then once the distributors decided they didn't want... Well, basically, Weird Miniatures decided they want to go direct. And so then the distributors like, well, then there's nothing in it for us. If you're going to sell directly, you're going to give people better margins, better deals. Yep. Essentially, Weird didn't really have a plan for Canada as far as we understand.
Well, their plan was regular shipping. Which is not a plan.
Is not a plan. Unfortunately, the Canadian market is with the border and all that is like if you want your game to succeed in Canada, you have to sweeten the deal a little bit with some sort of shipping threshold or whatever. I think there was other factors. They had like at that time, like I think we were willing to work with them, but then they had like no new releases, and then they had other business practices like putting new products on sale on their website before it would come out to street dates and read. So then anyway. So that made our decision up basically, because we're like, oh, if we can't easily get this anymore, then it's too much of a hassle. Then we'll have to liberate the shelf space for something else. So most of your local stores across the world, this is the decision. So whenever someone comes in, they're like, why don't you carry this game? And you're like, I don't know, I can't get it. Like, or where can I get it? Which distributor? How do they obtain it? So it's like, it's not easy. So this is another aspect where Games Workshop has a very dominant, powerful position. A lot of people, I get people coming in, especially people that have been in the Games Workshop hobby for like 20 plus years. They always have these stories, maybe because they knew other hobby store owners, or they were hobby store owners. They have this like, evil CEO type of thing vibe about Games Workshop, and they're like, oh, they must be really difficult to deal with. I'm like, no, they're not actually. They make it really easy, because there's like parts of that equation that, like, whether it's shipping or the way the prices are set, like, for example, we get to pay in Canadian dollars, so that's a massive thing too. Keeps costs stable. So just because the dollar tanks doesn't mean we all of a sudden have to pay more for their products. It's just, they make tweaks across the year anyway. But all of that is all like factors that, again, why stores are probably leaning more into that than ever, because it's like,
in uncertain times, you kind of just like, you go for the easy thing, right? Like you just inevitably, you're like, well, I need to put food on the table. I need to pay rent, and I need to get through this. So like, things that are certain, things that are easy, things that don't cause any sort of like question marks into the future, that's where you're going to kind of go, right? So
so if there's could be a really good game, small game, but if I have to get it, let's say the only place to get it is from Europe or something like that, that makes the barrier just so much harder, because you're just like, no, I have to order a lot more at once. Restocks are going to be a lot slower, so that's going to kill momentum. New releases might come in, so there might be a new release cycle, and it's like 3 things, and you're like, oh, these are all great things, but like,
cool, how do I build an order for this?
How do I build an order though? And so
shipping thresholds,
and all these things is so challenging. And then sometimes the currency does a funny thing, and you do bring it in, but you got to like add 30% to the MSRP, and then customers are upset, and they're like, "Oh,
why does it cost so much?
Why this was like
they crossed a giant ocean.
This was like $40 last week, and now it's like 60 or something, and it's not even like a crazy. Like sometimes the jump is that big, and you're like, well, that's how much it costs to bring it now, right? So another massive factor there.
Now, cycling back around to, let's use Warcrow as the new example here for this 2024. I think obviously they have a lot of advantages. The in-house production. They have the fact that Corvus Belli is already established at distributors, which means that the new distributors are going to take their new product in.
They're like a trusted
So they have as much of a best chance as anyone does in this market of actually succeeding. The question just being, once again, is are they going to, like, is it going to matter? Are people going to care, right? So that's where they have to do the work.
So I guess our question to you is, do you care?
Do you care
about are you excited about new and different games? Are you still just like, no, give me all the Games Workshop, I'll eat as much as I can or whatever? What do you feel about that? Are people playing or thinking about other games or whatever? So
like and comment, subscribe. That helps us out a lot if you've watched this long. And we'll talk to you later. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.